I accidentally discovered adoption papers for my sister Emma while helping my parents clean out the basement after a flood. When I innocently asked my parents about them over dinner, the atmosphere in the room instantly froze. My father dropped his fork, my mother went pale, and they both stared at me like I had committed an unforgivable sin. From that moment forward, my parents began treating me like I did not exist. They stopped responding to my texts, avoided eye contact, and when I visited, they gave me cold, one-word answers while showering Emma with excessive attention and affection. The papers had been tucked inside an old photo album, yellowed with age and water damage from the recent basement flooding. I had been helping my parents salvage what we could from the mess when I opened the album to check if the pictures were ruined. That is when I saw them, official adoption documents with Emma's name, dated 20 years ago when she was just 6 months old. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Emma was my sister, my parents' daughter. We had grown up together, shared the same bedroom when we were little, fought over toys, and later over who got to use the car. The idea that she was adopted had never crossed my mind, not even once. But there it was, in black and white legal documents. Emma Claire Patterson, adopted by David and Susan Patterson on March 15, 2003. My parents' signatures were right there at the bottom, along with some lawyer's official seal. I figured it was no big deal. Adoption is normal, right? Lots of families have adopted children, and it does not make them any less part of the family. I thought my parents would just explain the situation. Maybe tell me why they had never mentioned it before, and we would move on. I could not have been more wrong. That evening at dinner, I casually brought up what I had found. I was not trying to cause trouble or create drama. I just asked, "Hey, I found some old papers in the basement today. I did not know Emma was adopted. When were you planning to tell us?" The reaction was immediate and terrifying. My father's fork clattered against his plate as it fell from his hand. My mother's face went completely white, like all the blood had drained from her body. Emma looked confused, glancing between our parents and me with a questioning expression. "What papers?" my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "The adoption papers," I replied, still not understanding why everyone looked so panicked. "They were in that old photo album. It is okay. I mean, adoption is not a bad thing or anything." My father stood up so quickly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "We need to talk," he said to my mother, completely ignoring me. They both left the dining room without another word, leaving Emma and me sitting there in stunned silence. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, my world has been turned completely upside down. The change in my parents' behavior toward me was not gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. One day, we were a normal, close-knit family, and the next day, I had become invisible to them. At first, I thought they were just upset that I had discovered Emma's adoption without them being ready to tell us. I figured they needed some time to process things and decide how to handle the situation. But as days turned into weeks, their behavior became increasingly bizarre and hurtful. My text messages to them went unanswered. When I called, they would give me one-word responses before quickly hanging up. If I showed up at the house, they would barely acknowledge my presence, speaking only when absolutely necessary and avoiding all eye contact. But it was not just that they were ignoring me. They were also acting strange in other ways that made no sense. I started noticing things missing from the house during my brief, uncomfortable visits. The antique china cabinet that had belonged to my grandmother was gone. My mother's pearl necklace, the one she wore to every special occasion, was nowhere to be seen. My father's collection of vintage model trains, which he had been building since before I was born, had disappeared from the basement. When I asked about these missing items, my questions were met with cold stares and subject changes. My mother would suddenly remember she had laundry to fold or dishes to wash. My father would mumble something about needing to check on something in the garage and walk away. Meanwhile, Emma seemed completely oblivious to the tension. In fact, if anything, our parents were treating her better than ever. I would arrive to find expensive shopping bags in the living room filled with clothes and jewelry for her. They had bought her a brand new laptop for college, even though her old one was working perfectly fine. They talked constantly about setting up a trust fund for her education and future, something they had never mentioned before for either of us. Emma would show me her new things with excitement, not realizing how strange the whole situation was. "Look at this amazing necklace Dad bought me," she would say. Or "Mom took me shopping yesterday and insisted on buying me this designer purse." I tried to be happy for her, but inside I was struggling with a growing sense of confusion and hurt. Why were they suddenly lavishing expensive gifts on Emma while treating me like I had done something terrible? What had changed besides my discovery of those adoption papers? The answer came when I started paying closer attention to what was happening around the house. During one particularly awkward visit, I excused myself to use the bathroom and overheard my father on the phone in his study. The door was slightly open, and I could hear his voice clearly. He sounded desperate and stressed in a way I had never heard before. "Please, you have to give us more time," he was saying. "We are trying to get the money together, but it is not easy. Our family is going through a difficult situation right now." There was a pause while someone on the other end spoke. "No, no, please do not do that," my father continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Think about what this would do to our family. Think about Emma. She does not deserve this. Please, just give us another month." Another pause. "Yes, we understand the consequences, but we need more time. We will get you what you want, but please, do not destroy our family over this." I heard footsteps approaching the study, so I quickly moved away from the door and went back to the living room, but my mind was racing. Who was my father talking to? What money did they need to get together? And what consequences was he referring to? Later that week, I witnessed another disturbing scene. I had stopped by the house to drop off some mail that had been delivered to my apartment by mistake. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my mother loading several boxes into the trunk of her car. When she saw me approaching, she quickly slammed the trunk shut and hurried into the house without greeting me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I waited until she went inside and then looked through the car window. I could see the corner of what looked like a jewelry box sticking out from under a blanket in the back seat. My mother was selling her jewelry. That evening, I called Emma to see if she had noticed anything strange about our parents' behavior. "Strange how?" she asked. "They seem fine to me. Actually, they have been really generous lately. Dad gave me $500 yesterday just because, and Mom took me to that expensive restaurant downtown for lunch. Have you noticed anything missing from the house? Like Grandma's china cabinet or Dad's model trains?" Emma paused. "Now that you mention it, yeah, some things are different. But I just figured they were redecorating or something." "Why? What is going on?" I did not know what to tell her. I could not shake the feeling that my discovery of her adoption papers had somehow triggered a chain of events that was tearing our family apart, but I could not understand how or why. The breaking point came a few days later when I decided to drive by my father's construction business. I had not visited the office in months, but I knew the secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, and thought she might be able to give me some insight into what was happening with my family. What I saw in the parking lot made my blood run cold. My father's prized 1972 Chevrolet Camaro, the car he had restored himself and always said he would never sell, was gone from his reserved parking spot. In its place was a beat-up pickup truck I had never seen before. Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed my fears when I went inside to ask about the car. "Your father sold it last week," she told me sadly. "He seemed really upset about it, but he said he needed the money for family expenses." Honestly, Linus, I have been worried about him. He has been acting very strange lately, taking a lot of phone calls in private and looking stressed all the time. As I drove home, pieces of a disturbing puzzle began forming in my mind. My parents were liquidating their valuable possessions, having mysterious and desperate phone conversations, and treating me like I had committed some unforgivable sin. All of this had started the moment I discovered Emma's adoption papers. But what I could not figure out was why. What was so terrible about me knowing that Emma was adopted? And who was threatening our family? I was about to find out, and the truth would be more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I knew I had to figure out what was really happening to my family. The stress of not knowing was eating away at me, and watching my parents deteriorate while treating me like a stranger was becoming unbearable. I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to follow them the next time they left for one of their mysterious errands. The opportunity came 3 days later. I had parked across the street from their house, waiting and watching. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, both my parents came out of the house looking tense and worried. My mother was carrying a large manila envelope, and my father kept checking his phone nervously. They got into their car and drove toward downtown. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. What was I about to discover about my own family? They drove for about 20 minutes before pulling into a parking garage in the business district. I parked a few levels up and watched as they walked to the far corner of the garage, where a familiar figure was waiting for them. It was Uncle Roger. My father's younger brother had always been the black sheep of the family. Where my father was hard-working and responsible, Roger was impulsive and always looking for get-rich-quick schemes. He had been in and out of various business ventures over the years, most of which ended in failure. My father had bailed him out financially more times than I could count, usually with reluctance and lectures about responsibility. But this meeting did not look like my father helping Roger. If anything, the power dynamic seemed completely reversed. From my hiding spot behind a concrete pillar, I watched the interaction unfold. Roger was dressed much better than usual, wearing an expensive-looking suit and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He was leaning against a brand-new luxury sedan, a BMW that looked like it had just driven off the lot. My parents approached him slowly, like they were walking toward their own execution. My mother handed Roger the manila envelope she had been carrying. He opened it immediately and began counting what was obviously cash. A lot of cash. Even from a distance, I could see Roger shaking his head and saying something that made my mother start crying. My father put his arm around her shoulders, but he looked defeated and scared. Roger was clearly not satisfied with whatever amount they had brought him. The conversation became more heated. Roger stepped closer to my parents, and I could see him pointing his finger aggressively at my father's chest. He pulled out his phone and showed them something on the screen that made both my parents recoil visibly. My mother actually stumbled backward, as if she had been physically struck. Roger's demeanor throughout the entire exchange was cold and threatening. This was not a family member asking for help. This was someone with power over my parents, someone who was making demands they were desperate to meet. The meeting lasted about 15 minutes. By the end, my father had pulled out his own wallet and handed Roger what looked like more cash. Probably everything he had with him. Roger pocketed the money without even counting it, said something else that made my mother sob harder, and then got into his expensive car and drove away. My parents stood there in the empty garage for several minutes after he left, holding each other and crying. I had never seen my father look so broken. He was always the strong one in our family, the one who fixed problems and took care of everyone. Seeing him reduced to this state was devastating. I waited until they drove away before I left the garage, my mind reeling with questions. What kind of hold did Uncle Roger have over my parents? Where had he gotten the money for that expensive car and clothes? And why had this all started when I discovered Emma's adoption papers? That evening, I could not concentrate on anything. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, trying to understand what I had witnessed. Roger had looked comfortable and confident, like someone who was used to being in control. My parents had looked terrified and defeated, like people who were being backed into a corner with no way out. I decided I needed to know more about Uncle Roger's recent activities. I called my cousin Jake, Roger's son, who I had not spoken to in months. We had grown up together and were fairly close, despite his father's problematic behavior. Jake, this might sound like a weird question, but has your dad come into money recently? Like, a lot of money? Jake was quiet for a moment. Yeah, actually. It is kind of strange. About 6 months ago, he suddenly had cash for everything. New car, new apartment, expensive clothes. He told me he had made some smart investments. But honestly, my dad has never been smart about money in his life. Did he say what kind of investments? Not really. But he has been acting different too. More secretive. More paranoid. He keeps checking his phone constantly and having these hushed conversations. Sometimes I feel like he is hiding something big, but I do not know what. After I hung up with Jake, I felt even more unsettled. 6 months ago would have been right around the time my parents started acting strange, though I had not noticed it as much back then because I was dealing with my own work stress and had not been visiting as often. I made another decision that night. I was going to confront Uncle Roger directly. The next day, I looked up his new address. According to Jake, Roger had moved into a high-end apartment complex on the other side of town. The kind of place that required excellent credit and substantial income to get approved for a lease. I drove over there after work, not really sure what I was going to say, but knowing I needed answers. The apartment complex was impressive, with a gated entrance, valet parking, and landscaped grounds that looked like something out of a magazine. Roger's apartment was on the 10th floor with a view of the city skyline. When he opened the door, I could see expensive furniture and artwork behind him. Whatever he was doing for money, it was clearly working well for him. "Linus," he said, looking surprised but not entirely displeased to see me. "This is unexpected. What brings you to my new place?" "We need to talk, Uncle Roger, about whatever is going on between you and my parents." His expression changed instantly. The friendly surprise was replaced by a calculating look that made me uncomfortable. But after a moment, he stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. "Sir, nephew, let us talk." As I walked into his apartment, I noticed more evidence of his newfound wealth. The furniture was all high-end, the kind you see in expensive showrooms. He had a massive flat-screen television and a sound system that probably cost more than my car. Everything looked brand new. Roger offered me a drink, which I declined. He poured himself a glass of what looked like expensive whiskey and settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than most people make in a month. "So," he said, swirling his drink casually, "what exactly do you think is going on between me and your parents?" I decided to be direct. "I saw you meeting them in that parking garage. I saw them give you money. I want to know why." Roger smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "Did you now?" "That is very interesting, Linus. Very interesting indeed." He took a long sip of his drink, studying me over the rim of his glass. The silence stretched between us, and I began to feel like I had made a serious mistake coming here alone. "Tell me," Roger finally said, "what do you know about Emma's adoption?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How did he know about that? And why was he asking? "I know she was adopted 20 years ago. That is about it." Roger's smile grew wider and more unsettling. "Is it? That is all you know?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Well then," Roger said, setting down his drink and leaning forward, "maybe it is time someone told you the whole truth about your precious little family." The way he said it made my blood run cold. I had the distinct feeling that I was about to learn something that would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and myself. And I was right. Roger stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet in the corner of his apartment. He pulled out a thick folder and brought it back to where I was sitting, placing it on the coffee table between us with a satisfied thud. "You want to know what is going on with your parents, Linus? You want to know why they have been acting so strange? Why they are giving me money?" He opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. My hands shook as I recognized some of the paperwork, copies of Emma's adoption documents, but also other papers I had never seen before. Roger settled back into his chair with his drink, clearly enjoying the moment. "Your parents have been lying to you your entire life. To Emma, too. Do you want to know what really happened 28 years ago?" I could not speak. I just stared at the folder, dreading what I was about to hear but knowing I needed to know the truth. "You had a sister," Roger began, his voice taking on a tone that was almost conversational, as if he was discussing the weather. "A biological sister. Her name was Sarah. She was 2 years old, walking, talking, the most beautiful little girl you ever saw. Your parents adored her." He pulled out a faded newspaper clipping and handed it to me. The headline read, "Local toddler dies in car accident." Below it was a small, black and white photo of a little girl with curly hair and a bright smile. "That is Sarah," Roger continued. "Your real sister. She died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning in November. Your mother was driving. She hit a patch of ice, lost control of the car, and slammed into a tree. Your mother survived with minor injuries. Sarah died on impact." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at the newspaper clipping, trying to process what I was hearing. I had a sister who died? My mother was in the accident? Your parents never told anyone the complete truth about what happened that day, Roger went on, clearly relishing my shock. They let people believe it was just a tragic accident, which technically it was. But what they did not tell anyone was that your mother had been drinking the night before and was still hungover that morning. She was not legally drunk, but she was impaired enough that it affected her reaction time. He handed me another document, what looked like a police report. The investigating officer noted that your mother seemed disoriented and smelled like alcohol. But her blood alcohol level was just under the legal limit by the time they tested her, hours after the accident. No charges were filed, but your parents knew the truth. My stomach was churning. I could not believe what I was hearing. That is not possible. My mother barely drinks at all. Now she does not, Roger replied. But back then, she had a serious problem. Your father was working long hours building his construction business, and your mother was home alone with 2 small children most of the time. She started drinking to cope with the stress and loneliness. The morning Sarah died, she was nursing a hangover and should never have been driving. He pulled out more documents, what looked like medical records and insurance paperwork. After Sarah died, your parents were destroyed by guilt. Your mother had a complete nervous breakdown. They both went into therapy, your mother got sober, and they decided they needed to do something to honor Sarah's memory and heal their family. So they adopted Emma, I said quietly, beginning to understand. Exactly. Emma was 6 months old, about the same age Sarah had been when they brought you home from the hospital. Your parents saw it as a sign, a chance to save a child who needed a family while healing their own broken hearts. They legally adopted Emma and decided to never tell anyone about Sarah. They wanted to protect Emma from the burden of knowing she was essentially a replacement for a dead child. And they wanted to protect themselves from having to relive the trauma every time someone asked about their family history. Roger leaned back in his chair, watching my face carefully. For 20 years, they managed to keep the secret. Emma grew up believing she was just adopted into a loving family, never knowing she was brought in to fill the void left by a little girl who died because her adoptive mother made a terrible, fatal mistake. I was struggling to breathe. The weight of this information was crushing. But how do you know all this? And why are you telling me? Roger's expression grew cold and calculating. I found out by accident about 6 months ago. I was helping your father with some paperwork for the business, and I came across some old insurance documents that mentioned Sarah's death benefits. When I asked about it, your father broke down and told me everything. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. At first, I felt sorry for them. I understood why they had kept it secret, but then I started thinking about how devastating this information would be if it came out. How much it would hurt Emma to learn that she was adopted to replace a dead child. How much it would destroy your family if people knew the truth about the accident. He turned back to face me, and his expression was purely predatory. That is when I realized I had something valuable. Something your parents would pay anything to protect. The full scope of his betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You have been blackmailing them. I prefer to think of it as a family loan with very specific terms, Roger replied casually. I told your parents that I needed some financial help, and that in exchange for their generosity, I would make sure their family secrets stayed safe. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. I stood up, anger finally overriding my shock. You are extorting money from your own brother? To keep quiet about something that happened 28 years ago? Roger shrugged. Your parents have been living a lie for decades, Linus. They built their entire family identity around protecting Emma from the truth. They will pay anything to maintain that protection. How much have you taken from them? Not as much as you might think. I am not greedy. Just $20,000 over the past 6 months. Enough to improve my living situation and lifestyle, but not enough to bankrupt them. I am reasonable. $20,000. No wonder my parents were selling their possessions and acting so stressed. Roger was bleeding them dry, taking advantage of their love for Emma and their guilt over Sarah's death. But here is the thing, Linus, Roger continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Your parents made a critical mistake when you found those adoption papers. They panicked and started acting suspicious around you. They were terrified you would start digging deeper and discover the truth about Sarah, so they decided to distance themselves from you to protect the secret. That explained their bizarre behavior toward me. They were not angry at me for discovering Emma's adoption. They were terrified I would uncover the deeper truth about why she was adopted in the first place. "The problem is," Roger said, settling back into his chair, "their obvious stress and strange behavior is starting to attract attention. Emma has been asking questions about why they are treating you differently. Other family members have noticed the tension. The more desperate they act, the more likely it becomes that someone will start investigating." He picked up his drink and took a slow sip, studying me over the rim. "Which brings me to why I am so happy you decided to come here today, nephew. Because you and I need to have a very important conversation about how this situation is going to move forward." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I had come here looking for answers. But I was beginning to realize I had walked into something much more dangerous than I had anticipated. Roger was not just blackmailing my parents, he was enjoying it. And now that I knew his secret, I had a feeling I was about to become part of his twisted game whether I wanted to or not. Roger refilled his drink and offered me one again, which I again declined. My mind was reeling from everything he had told me about Sarah and the accident. But I could tell from his demeanor that he was not finished. There was more to this story, and whatever it was, Roger was excited to share it. "You know, Linus," he said, settling back into his chair with obvious satisfaction, "when I first discovered your parents' little secret, I thought it was just a lucky break. A chance to get some financial help during a rough patch in my life. But as I started digging deeper into your family's history, I realized this situation was much more valuable than I had originally thought." He walked over to his filing cabinet again and pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. "Did you know that your father's construction business has been doing extremely well lately? Better than he lets on, actually." I shook my head. I knew my father's company was successful, but he had always been modest about their financial situation. "Last year alone, his company cleared over $800,000 in profit," Roger continued, waving some financial documents I could not quite see from where I was sitting. "He has been getting contracts for major commercial buildings, shopping centers, even some municipal projects. Your father is actually quite wealthy now, much more so than he was when you were growing up." Roger spread several documents out on the coffee table. They looked like bank statements, tax returns, and business contracts. "The problem is, your father has always been terrible at keeping track of his books. He trusts people too much, delegates too much responsibility, and does not pay enough attention to the financial details of his business." A cold feeling of dread was growing in my stomach. "What does that have to do with Emma's adoption?" Roger smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Everything, nephew. You see, when I started asking for money to keep quiet about Sarah and Emma, I told your father I needed access to the business accounts to make the transfers look legitimate. I convinced him that it would be safer if the payments appeared to be business expenses rather than personal withdrawals that might attract attention from your mother or the bank." He pulled out a stack of bank statements and spread them across the table. "So your father gave me authorization to handle some of the business accounting. He was so stressed and distracted by the blackmail situation that he just signed whatever paperwork I put in front of him. He thought he was protecting his family. What he was actually doing was giving me access to steal from his business." The full scope of Roger's deception was starting to become clear, and it was worse than I had imagined. "You have been embezzling from his company for almost 3 years now," Roger confirmed proudly. "Small amounts at first, just skimming a little off the top of big contracts. Your father was making so much money that he never noticed a few thousand here and there. But as I got more comfortable with the system, I started taking larger amounts." He handed me a spreadsheet that showed months of financial transactions. The numbers were staggering. Roger had been stealing thousands of dollars every month, sometimes tens of thousands during months when the company had particularly large projects. "In total, I have taken about $350,000 from your father's business over the past 3 years, Roger said casually, as if he was discussing the weather. "The beautiful thing is, your father still has no idea. He thinks the money he has been giving me for the blackmail is the only money I am getting from him." I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. My father had worked his entire life to build his construction business. He employed dozens of people, supported their families, took pride in his work and his reputation, and his own brother had been systematically stealing from him for years. "But here is where things get interesting," Roger continued, clearly enjoying my horrified expression. "About 2 months ago, your father hired a new accountant, someone young and sharp who actually pays attention to details. This new accountant started asking questions about some of the financial discrepancies, wanting to review old contracts and expense reports." Roger walked over to his window again, looking out at the city with obvious satisfaction. "Your father panicked when the accountant started digging into the books. He asked me if I knew anything about the missing money, and of course I told him I had no idea. But I also told him that if there was an investigation into the business finances, it might attract attention to our other arrangement. People might start asking questions about why he was making large cash withdrawals and where that money was going." The manipulation was breathtaking. Roger had created a situation where my father was afraid to investigate the embezzlement because he thought it would expose the blackmail scheme and destroy Emma's life. "So your father decided to cover up the missing money himself, rather than risk having his family secrets exposed," Roger explained. "He started liquidating personal assets to replace the stolen funds before the accountant could complete a full audit. That is why you have been seeing him sell family heirlooms and your mother's jewelry. They think they are protecting Emma by covering up my embezzlement." I felt like I was going to be sick. My parents were destroying themselves financially to cover up crimes they did not even know their own family member was committing against them. "But that is not even the best part," Roger said, returning to his chair with obvious excitement. "The accountant your father hired is really good at her job. She is going to figure out that someone with access to the business accounts has been stealing money, probably within the next few weeks. When she does, she is going to recommend a full forensic audit of all the company's financial records." He pulled out what looked like an official document from an accounting firm. "The audit is scheduled to begin in exactly 23 days. When it happens, they are going to discover not only the embezzlement, but also all of your father's attempts to cover it up with his personal assets. It is going to look like your father has been stealing from his own company to fund some kind of secret expenses." The trap Roger had set was diabolical. My father was going to be accused of embezzling from his own business, while Roger, the actual thief, remained completely hidden. "Here is the beautiful part," Roger continued, leaning forward with anticipation. "When the audit reveals the embezzlement and your father becomes the prime suspect, I am going to offer to help him. I will tell him that I have been doing my own investigation and that I have discovered evidence that someone else has been stealing from the company. Someone with access to the accounts who has been manipulating the records." He handed me a manila folder filled with forged documents and falsified records. "I am going to present evidence that proves you have been embezzling from your father's company, Linus. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts in your name, forged authorization forms with your signature, email correspondence that makes it look like you have been planning this theft for months." I stared at the fabricated evidence in shock. It was incredibly detailed and convincing. If someone did not know better, these documents would absolutely prove that I had been stealing from my father's business. "Of course, your father will be devastated to learn that his own son has been betraying him," Roger said with obvious satisfaction. "But he will also be relieved that the evidence clears him of any wrongdoing. The missing money will be explained. The audit will conclude that he was the victim rather than the perpetrator, and his business reputation will be saved." The plan was perfect from Roger's perspective. He would emerge as the hero who discovered the truth, my father would be cleared of suspicion, and I would take the blame for crimes I never committed. "But that is still not the best part," Roger continued, clearly savoring the moment. "Once everyone believes you have been stealing from the family business, I am going to tell your parents that I have more bad news for them. I am going to reveal that you have been planning to expose Emma's adoption secret as revenge for being caught embezzling." He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages and emails that appeared to be from me, threatening to tell Emma the truth about Sarah's death and her adoption, unless my parents covered up my embezzlement. "These messages will prove that you have been using Emma's adoption as leverage against your parents, threatening to destroy her emotional well-being unless they protected you from the consequences of your theft. It will look like you have been manipulating and extorting your own family." The forgeries were incredibly sophisticated. The messages were written in a style that sounded like me, referencing specific family details and inside jokes that only someone with intimate knowledge of our family would know. In one devastating revelation, I will expose you as not only a thief, but also as someone who was willing to traumatize his adopted sister for personal gain, Roger explained. Your parents will be horrified, Emma will be devastated, and your entire family will turn against you. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the scope of Roger's betrayal. He had not just been stealing money or blackmailing my parents. He had been systematically destroying my family while positioning himself as their protector and ally. The beauty of this plan, Roger concluded, is that it solves all my problems at once. The embezzlement gets blamed on you instead of me. Your parents stop asking questions about missing money because they think you took it. Emma's adoption secret stays protected because everyone will believe you were just using it as a weapon. And I get to be the hero who saved the family from your betrayal. He finished his drink and set the glass down with satisfaction. Your parents will be so grateful to me for exposing your crimes and protecting Emma that they will probably offer to pay me a reward. I will reluctantly accept, of course, because family takes care of family. Roger stood up and walked over to where I was sitting, looming over me with a predatory expression. Which brings us to why you are really here, Linus. Because tomorrow morning, I am going to call your parents and tell them that I have discovered some disturbing evidence about the missing money from your father's business. I am going to arrange a family meeting where I will present all of this evidence and expose your crimes to everyone. He leaned down closer to my face, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Unless, of course, you would prefer to save everyone the trouble and just confess to everything yourself. Admit to the embezzlement, apologize to your family, and disappear quietly. It would be much less traumatic for Emma that way. I looked up at him, finally understanding the full scope of what I was facing. Roger had not just been stealing from my family. He had been planning my complete destruction for months, maybe even years. Everything that had happened, from the moment I discovered Emma's adoption papers to my parents' strange behavior to this very conversation, had all been leading to this moment. Roger had built the perfect trap, and I was about to be destroyed by it unless I could find a way to fight back. But as I sat there surrounded by forged evidence of crimes I never committed, threatened with the destruction of every relationship I cared about, I realized something that Roger had not counted on. He had just made a critical mistake. In his arrogance and excitement about his perfect plan, he had revealed everything to me. He had shown me all his evidence, explained his entire strategy, and given me detailed knowledge of exactly how he planned to destroy my life. Roger thought he was gloating over a defeated enemy. What he had actually done was give me the information I needed to fight back. The war for my family's survival was about to begin, and now I knew exactly what I was fighting against. I left Roger's apartment that night with my mind racing and my hands shaking. The full scope of his betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. He had been systematically destroying my family for years, stealing money, manipulating emotions, and now planning to frame me for his own crimes while positioning himself as our savior. But I also left with something Roger had not intended to give me, a complete understanding of his plan. In his arrogance, he had revealed every detail of his scheme, shown me all his fabricated evidence, and explained exactly how he intended to destroy my life. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over the situation. My first instinct was to go directly to my parents and tell them everything, but I realized that would not work. They were already so stressed and paranoid that they might not believe me, especially when Roger had such convincing forged evidence to support his version of events. I needed proof of his crimes before I could expose him. I spent the next 3 days planning my counterattack. If Roger could create false evidence, then I could gather real evidence. If he could manipulate situations to his advantage, then I could turn his own tactics against him. The first thing I did was contact the accounting firm that was conducting the audit of my father's business. I explained that I was David Patterson's son, and that I had some concerns about potential fraud that they should be aware of during their investigation. The head accountant, a woman named Miss Chen, agreed to meet with me. During our meeting, I explained that I suspected someone with access to the business accounts had been embezzling money, and that my father was unaware of it. I provided her with copies of some of the documents Roger had shown me, particularly the bank statements that showed the pattern of missing funds. I also warned her that whoever was responsible might try to frame someone else for their crimes. Miss Chen was very interested in what I told her. These patterns you are showing me are consistent with what we have been finding in our preliminary review, she said. Someone has definitely been manipulating the accounts, and your father does not appear to be the one responsible. His personal financial records show he has been using his own assets to try to replace missing business funds, which suggests he is the victim rather than the perpetrator. She promised to investigate the embezzlement more thoroughly and to look specifically for signs that someone was planning to frame an innocent person for the theft. My next step was to gather evidence of Roger's blackmail scheme. This was more difficult because most of their interactions had been private conversations and cash transactions. But I remembered that Roger had mentioned having documentation about Sarah's death and Emma's adoption. If I could prove that he was using those family secrets to extort money from my parents, it would support my version of events. I decided to approach this problem from an unexpected angle. I called my cousin Jake again and asked him if he could help me with something important related to his father. Jake, I need to ask you to do something that might seem strange, but I promise I will explain everything later. Does your dad keep important papers or files at his apartment? Yeah, he has a whole filing cabinet full of stuff. He is actually pretty paranoid about it. He keeps it locked and gets angry if anyone goes near it. Why? I think your father has been doing some things that could hurt our family, and I need to prove it before he does something really damaging. Would you be willing to help me get access to those files? Jake was quiet for a long moment. My dad has been acting really strange lately, and I have been worried about him. If you think he is doing something that could hurt people, then yeah, I will help you. We arranged for Jake to invite me over to his father's apartment when Roger was out. Jake had a key because he sometimes helped with errands and maintenance. While Jake kept watch, I photographed every document in Roger's filing cabinet, including all the evidence he had gathered about Sarah's death, Emma's adoption, and the fabricated proof of my supposed embezzlement. The documents were even more damaging than I had realized. Roger had not only been blackmailing my parents and stealing from my father's business, but he had also been documenting everything meticulously. He had copies of every payment my parents had made to him, records of every lie he had told them, and detailed plans for how he intended to frame me for his crimes. Most importantly, I found evidence that proved Roger had been planning this scheme for much longer than he had admitted. Some of the documents were dated almost 4 years ago, showing that he had been gathering information about our family's secrets and looking for ways to exploit them long before he claimed to have discovered the truth about Sarah by accident. But the most valuable evidence I found was a series of emails between Roger and someone named Marcus Webb, who appeared to be helping him create the forged documents that were supposed to incriminate me. The emails discussed specific details about how to make fake bank statements and authorization forms look authentic, and they referenced payment for these services. I also found Roger's real financial records, which showed exactly how much money he had stolen from my father's business and how he had been spending it. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. My final step was to set up my own recording device. Roger had mentioned that he was planning to call my parents the next day to arrange a family meeting where he would present his fabricated evidence against me. I needed to record that conversation to prove his intentions. I bought a small digital recorder and hid it in my jacket pocket. Then I called Roger and told him I wanted to meet with him again to discuss his ultimatum. I have been thinking about what you said, I told him over the phone. Maybe you are right. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just confessed and disappeared quietly. But I want to understand exactly what you are going to tell my family before I make that decision. Roger was clearly pleased that I seemed to be surrendering. Smart choice, Linus. Come over tonight, and we will work out the details. When I arrived at his apartment that evening, Roger was in an excellent mood. He had been drinking and was more talkative than ever about his plans. With my recorder running, he explained in detail exactly how he was going to destroy my reputation and frame me for his crimes. Tomorrow morning, I am going to call your father and tell him that I have been conducting my own investigation into the missing money from his business, Roger said, pacing around his living room with obvious excitement. I will tell him that I have discovered shocking evidence that his own son has been betraying him. He showed me the forged documents again, explaining how each piece of fabricated evidence was designed to make me look guilty. I will present this gradually, letting the horror sink in slowly. First, the bank statements showing transfers to your accounts, then the authorization forms with your forged signature, Then the emails where you allegedly planned the whole scheme. Roger was so confident in his plan that he even revealed details I had not known before. The best part is that I have been setting this up for months. I have been making small comments to your parents about how you have been asking suspicious questions about the business finances. I planted seeds of doubt about your motivations and your character. By the time I present the evidence tomorrow, they will already be predisposed to believe the worst about you. He also admitted that he had been manipulating Emma's perceptions of me. I have been telling Emma little stories about how you have always been jealous of the attention she gets from your parents. I convinced her that your recent strange behavior is because you resent her for being adopted. When she learns that you were planning to use her adoption against your parents, it will confirm everything I have been telling her about your character. The recording was perfect. Roger had confessed to embezzlement, blackmail, fraud, and emotional manipulation. He had detailed his entire scheme and admitted that all the evidence against me was fabricated. Most importantly, he had revealed that his plan was specifically designed to destroy my relationships with my family while making himself look like a hero. As the evening continued, Roger became even more careless with his words. He bragged about how much money he had stolen, laughed about how easy it had been to fool my father, and expressed genuine excitement about watching my family turn against me. The look on your father's face when he realizes his own son has been stealing from him will be priceless, Roger said with obvious satisfaction. And Emma will be so devastated when she learns that you were going to use her adoption as a weapon. Your whole family will hate you, and they will be grateful to me for protecting them from your betrayal. By the time I left his apartment that night, I had everything I needed to expose Roger completely. I had documented evidence of his crimes, recorded confessions of his plans, and proof that all the evidence against me was fabricated. But Roger had not finished with his preparations. The next morning, just as he had promised, he called my parents to arrange the family meeting where he planned to destroy my life. What he did not know was that I was ready for him. I had spent the past week preparing my own evidence and planning my own counterattack. The family meeting he was so excited about was going to become the scene of his downfall instead of mine. The war for my family's survival was about to reach its climax, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I was confident that justice would prevail. The call came at 8 o'clock in the morning. My father's voice was tense and formal when he asked me to come to the house for a family dinner that evening. Roger has some important information to share with all of us, he said. It concerns the family, and everyone needs to be there. I knew this was it, the moment Roger had been planning for months. He was finally ready to present his fabricated evidence and destroy my life in front of my entire family. But I was ready too. My recording device was fully charged. My evidence was organized, and I had prepared exactly what I was going to say to expose his crimes. I arrived at my parents' house at 6 o'clock sharp. Emma was already there, sitting in the living room looking confused and worried. My parents were in the kitchen, and I could hear them talking in hushed, anxious voices. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Roger arrived 15 minutes later, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his most expensive suit. He greeted everyone warmly, playing the role of the concerned family member who had important news to share. His performance was flawless. He looked serious but caring, like someone who was about to deliver difficult news but only because he loved his family. "Thank you all for coming," Roger said as we gathered around the dining room table. "I know this is unusual, but I have discovered some information that affects all of us, and I felt it was important that we address it as a family." He opened his briefcase and pulled out the folders containing his fabricated evidence. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to remain calm. Everything depended on my timing and my ability to present my evidence at exactly the right moment. "David," Roger said to my father, "I know you have been worried about some financial discrepancies at your company. The missing money, the accounting irregularities, the upcoming audit. I want you to know that I have been conducting my own investigation into these problems." My father looked surprised. "You have? I did not ask you to do that." "I know," Roger replied smoothly. "But you are my brother, and I could see how stressed you have been. I wanted to help if I could. What I discovered was very difficult to accept, but I think you have a right to know the truth." He pulled out the first set of forged documents, bank statements, that appeared to show transfers from my father's business account to accounts in my name. "I am afraid the missing money from your company has not disappeared randomly. It has been taken by someone with access to your accounts. Someone you trusted completely. My father took the documents and studied them with growing confusion and horror. These show transfers to Linus, he said quietly. But that is impossible. Linus does not have access to the business accounts. Actually, he does, Roger said, producing another set of fabricated documents. These are authorization forms giving him access to make transfers and withdrawals. They have your signature on them, David. My mother gasped when she saw the documents. Emma looked back and forth between me and the papers with growing alarm. The forged signatures were incredibly convincing. Even I had to admit that they looked exactly like my father's handwriting. I do not remember signing these, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. You signed them about 2 years ago, Roger explained. Linus told you he was starting his own small business and needed help with some financial transactions. You probably thought you were just helping your son get started. You had no way of knowing he was planning to use that access to steal from your company. The performance was masterful. Roger was presenting the fabricated evidence slowly, building a case piece by piece, allowing the horror to sink in gradually, just as he had planned. My parents looked devastated, and Emma was staring at me with growing suspicion and hurt. Roger continued laying out his fabricated case. He showed them the forged emails where I supposedly planned the embezzlement scheme. He presented fake financial records that made it appear I had been living beyond my means and needed the stolen money to maintain my lifestyle. Every piece of evidence was designed to make me look guilty and manipulative. But that is not the worst part, Roger said, his voice taking on a tone of reluctant sadness. I am afraid Linus has been planning something even more devastating to this family. He pulled out his phone and showed them the fabricated text messages, where I allegedly threatened to reveal Emma's adoption secret, unless my parents covered up my embezzlement. Emma's face went white when she saw the messages. What adoption secret? She asked in a shaky voice. Roger looked at my parents with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. I am so sorry, but Linus has been using your desire to protect Emma as leverage against you. He knows something about her adoption that he has been threatening to reveal, unless you helped him avoid consequences for his theft. My mother started crying. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Emma was staring at the fabricated messages with growing horror, beginning to understand that there were family secrets she had never been told. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Roger had presented all his evidence and was about to deliver his final blow about the adoption and Sarah's death. It was time for me to turn the tables completely. I stood up and pulled out my own recording device, placing it in the center of the table. Before Roger says another word, I announced, I think everyone should hear this. I pressed play, and Roger's voice filled the dining room, clear and unmistakable. I have been embezzling from your father's business for almost 3 years now. Small amounts at first, just skimming a little off the top of big contracts. But as I got more comfortable with the system, I started taking larger amounts. Roger's face went completely white. He started to stand up, but I gestured for him to sit back down. That is just the beginning, I said, fast-forwarding to another section of the recording. Here is where he admits to blackmailing you about Emma's adoption. Roger's recorded voice continued. I told your parents that I needed some financial help, and that in exchange for their generosity, I would make sure their family secrets stayed safe. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. My parents looked at Roger with growing horror and disbelief. Emma was staring at him like she had never seen him before. I fast-forwarded to the most damning part of the recording. I am going to present evidence that proves you have been embezzling from your father's company, Linus. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts in your name, forged authorization forms with your signature, email correspondence that makes it look like you have been planning this theft for months. These messages will prove that you have been using Emma's adoption as leverage against your parents, threatening to destroy her emotional well-being unless they protected you from the consequences of your theft. The silence in the room was deafening. Roger looked like he was about to be sick. His carefully constructed plan was crumbling around him, and everyone could see him for what he really was. But I was not finished. I pulled out the manila envelope containing all the evidence I had gathered from his apartment. Roger has been stealing from Dad's company for almost 4 years, I said, spreading out the real financial documents. He took over $350,000. These are his real financial records, showing exactly where the money went. I showed them the emails between Roger and Marcus Webb about creating forged documents. All the evidence he just showed you is fake. These emails prove that he paid someone to create false bank statements and authorization forms to frame me for his crimes. I pulled out copies of the blackmail payments my parents had been making to Roger. And this proves that he has been extorting money from you by threatening to reveal family secrets about Emma's adoption and Sarah's death. At the mention of Sarah's name, my parents both gasped. Emma looked completely confused. Roger has known about Sarah for years, I continued. He has been using your grief and your desire to protect Emma to steal money from you while simultaneously embezzling from Dad's business. He created this elaborate scheme to frame me for his crimes while positioning himself as the family hero. I played more sections of the recording where Roger bragged about manipulating Emma's feelings toward me and planning to destroy our family relationships for his own benefit. By the time I finished presenting all the evidence, Roger looked completely defeated. The smug confidence he had displayed just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by the desperate expression of someone who knew they had been caught. My father spoke first, his voice filled with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Roger, is this true? Have you been stealing from my company and lying to our family? Roger opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The evidence against him was overwhelming and undeniable. Emma stood up from the table, tears streaming down her face. You have been manipulating me against my own brother? Making me think he was jealous of me and plotting against our family? My mother was crying harder now, but her tears seemed to be a mixture of relief and grief. All this time, we thought Linus was going to hurt our family. We have been treating our own son terribly because we believed your lies. The confrontation continued for another hour as the full scope of Roger's betrayal became clear to everyone. He had not just stolen money or manipulated emotions, he had systematically attacked every relationship in our family while making us grateful for his supposed protection. In the end, Roger had nothing left to say. His perfect plan had backfired completely. Instead of destroying my life and making himself the family hero, he had exposed himself as a criminal and a manipulator who had been preying on people who loved and trusted him. My father called the police that evening. Roger was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, blackmail, and several other crimes. The evidence I had gathered ensured that he would face serious consequences for what he had done to our family. But more importantly, the truth had finally come out. My parents apologized to me through their tears, explaining how Roger's manipulation and their own fear had made them act irrationally toward me. Emma hugged me and told me how sorry she was for doubting me. The family meeting that Roger had planned as my destruction became instead the moment when our family began to heal from the damage he had caused. The weeks following Roger's arrest were a whirlwind of police interviews, legal proceedings, and family conversations that had been years overdue. The local prosecutor took Roger's case very seriously, especially given the sophisticated nature of his fraud scheme and the amount of money involved. With all the evidence I had gathered, including his recorded confessions, Roger's conviction was essentially guaranteed. The forensic audit of my father's construction company confirmed everything we had suspected. Roger had been stealing money systematically for almost 4 years, manipulating records and covering his tracks with increasingly complex deceptions. The final amount he had embezzled was actually higher than we had originally thought, over $400,000, when all the hidden transactions were uncovered. But the most important discovery was that my father's business was actually in much better financial shape than anyone had realized. Roger's embezzlement, while significant, had not damaged the company's long-term viability. Once the stolen money was recovered through Roger's prosecution and the sale of his assets, my father's business was able to continue operating normally. The emotional healing took longer than the financial recovery, but it was far more meaningful. The first major conversation was about Sarah and Emma's adoption. With Roger's threats no longer hanging over our family, my parents finally felt safe enough to tell Emma the complete truth about why she had been adopted and what had happened to Sarah. We gathered in the same dining room where Roger had tried to destroy our family, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of fear and suspicion, there was love and honesty. My father began by showing Emma a photo album they had kept hidden for 20 years, pictures of Sarah from birth until the day she died. Emma studied each photo carefully, tears streaming down her face as she realized she was looking at the sister she had never known existed. My mother told Emma about the accident with tremendous courage and honesty. She explained about her drinking problem at the time, her guilt over Sarah's death, and how adopting Emma had been both an attempt to heal their broken hearts and a way to honor Sarah's memory by saving another child who needed a family. "We never wanted you to feel like you were a replacement for Sarah," my mother said, holding Emma's hands across the table. "You were never a replacement. You were a gift, a new beginning, a chance for our family to love and be loved again. You brought joy back into our lives when we thought we would never be happy again." Emma cried for a long time after learning the truth, but they were not tears of anger or rejection. She was grieving for the sister she had never known, while also processing the depth of love that had brought her into our family. "I understand now why you kept it secret," Emma finally said. "And I am not angry that you did. I can see how much you have always loved me, how much you have always wanted to protect me. That love is real, regardless of how I became part of this family." She looked around the table at all of us. "Sarah will always be part of our family history, and I want to honor her memory too. But I also know that I belong here, that I have always belonged here. You are my parents, Linus is my brother, and this is my family." The conversation continued for hours as we shared stories, answered questions, and began the process of integrating this new understanding into our family identity. Emma asked to visit Sarah's grave, which she did with my parents the following week. She also asked if we could display some of Sarah's photos in the house, so she would always be remembered as part of our family story. My relationship with my parents required a different kind of healing. They had treated me terribly during the weeks when they thought I was a threat to Emma's emotional well-being. They had ignored me, avoided me, and essentially banished me from the family because Roger had convinced them I was planning to hurt Emma with the truth about her adoption. My father was the first to apologize, and his words came from a place of deep remorse and understanding. "Linus, I failed you as a father," he said during one of our conversations. "I let fear and manipulation cloud my judgment, and I treated my own son like an enemy. Roger convinced us that you were a threat to our family, when in reality, he was the threat. I should have talked to you directly instead of believing his lies. I should have trusted the relationship we had built over 28 years, instead of letting panic make my decisions." My mother's apology was equally heartfelt. "I was so terrified of losing Emma or seeing her hurt that I lost sight of everything else," she said. "Roger played on our fears and our guilt, and we let him turn us against you. We thought we were protecting our family, but we were actually letting someone destroy it from the inside." The process of rebuilding trust took time, but it was made easier by the fact that my parents genuinely understood what had happened and were committed to making things right. They had not rejected me out of malice or lack of love. They had been manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit their deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Emma also had her own apologies to make. "Roger had been telling me things about you for months," she admitted. "Little comments about how you had always been jealous of me, how you resented the attention I got from Mom and Dad. I started believing him, started looking for signs that you were plotting against me. When the family tensions started getting worse, I thought it confirmed what he had been saying." She shook her head in disgust. "He was so good at manipulation. He would say these things that sounded like he was just concerned about family harmony, but he was actually poisoning my mind against you. I should have trusted my own feelings about you instead of listening to his lies." The healing process was not just about apologies, though. It was about rebuilding our family relationships on a foundation of honesty and trust. We started having regular family dinners again, but this time with a commitment to open communication about everything. No more secrets, no more protecting each other from difficult truths, no more allowing outside manipulation to drive wedges between us. Roger's legal consequences were severe and appropriate. He was convicted on multiple felony charges, including embezzlement, fraud, blackmail, and identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution for all the money he had stolen. His expensive apartment, luxury car, and other assets were sold to help compensate my father's business for the financial damage. But perhaps more importantly, Roger's betrayal had consequences within our extended family as well. Other relatives who had once admired his apparent success now understood that his wealth had been built on theft and manipulation. His own son Jake was devastated to learn what his father had done, but he also felt relieved to finally understand why Roger had been acting so strangely. Jake became closer to our immediate family after Roger's conviction. He apologized repeatedly for his father's actions and offered to help in any way he could with the legal proceedings or the emotional recovery. "I should have seen the signs," he kept saying. "I should have known something was wrong when he suddenly had so much money." But we assured Jake that Roger's crimes were not his responsibility. If anything, Jake had been another victim of his father's deceptions, manipulated and lied to, just like the rest of us. As the months passed, our family grew stronger than it had ever been before. The crisis Roger had created had forced us to confront difficult truths about our past, but it had also brought us closer together in the present. We had learned that we could survive betrayal, overcome manipulation, and emerge from crisis with our love for each other intact. Emma thrived in her new understanding of her place in our family. She started college with confidence and joy, knowing that she was loved unconditionally and that her adoption was a source of strength rather than shame. She also began volunteering with adoption support groups, sharing her story to help other adopted children understand that being chosen for a family is just as meaningful as being born into one. My father's business recovered completely and actually grew stronger as a result of the improved financial oversight and accounting practices that were implemented after the embezzlement was discovered. He hired additional staff to handle the increased workload and established new procedures to prevent future fraud. My relationship with my parents reached a new level of closeness and mutual respect. We had been through a crisis together and emerged with a deeper understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. The experience had taught us that family relationships require active protection and constant communication to remain strong. Most importantly, I learned something about the power of standing up for truth and fighting for the people you love. When I first discovered those adoption papers in the basement, I never could have imagined the journey that discovery would take me on. I faced betrayal, manipulation, and the potential destruction of every relationship I valued most. But I also discovered that I was stronger than I had ever realized, that I could gather evidence, develop strategy, and fight back against someone who was trying to destroy my family. Roger had counted on our family's love for each other being a weakness he could exploit. He had assumed that our desire to protect Emma would make us vulnerable to manipulation, that our trust in family members would blind us to betrayal, and that our fear of difficult truths would keep us from fighting back when attacked. He was wrong on every count. Our love for each other turned out to be our greatest strength. It motivated me to fight harder than I ever had for anything in my life. It gave my parents the courage to face difficult truths about the past. It helped Emma process painful revelations while maintaining her sense of identity and belonging. The experience taught me that families are not perfect, and that love does not automatically protect you from betrayal or manipulation. But it also taught me that when family members commit to honesty, communication, and mutual support, they can overcome almost any challenge. Roger thought he could use our family's secrets against us, but those secrets lost their power once we faced them honestly together. He thought he could turn us against each other through lies and manipulation, but our genuine care for each other proved stronger than his deceptions. In the end, justice was served not just through Roger's legal conviction, but through our family's decision to choose truth over fear, love over suspicion, and unity over division. Today, almost 2 years later, our family is closer and happier than it has ever been. We have photo albums that include pictures of both Sarah and Emma, acknowledging all the children who have been part of our family story. We have family traditions that honor both our biological connections and our chosen relationships. We have open communication that allows us to address problems before they grow into crises. Emma is thriving in college and has even started dating someone who fully understands and embraces her adoption story. My parents are enjoying a renewed sense of partnership and trust after working through the trauma of Roger's betrayal together. My father's business continues to grow and succeed, and he now has systems in place to protect against future fraud. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for personal gain, but for the protection of the people and relationships that matter most. Standing up to Roger and exposing his crimes was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the most important. It saved my family from destruction and taught all of us lessons about love, trust, and resilience that will last for the rest of our lives. The story began with a devastating discovery that threatened to tear our family apart. It ends with a deeper understanding that families are built not just on blood or legal documents, but on the daily choice to love, protect, and support each other through whatever challenges life brings. Have you ever had to fight to protect your family from someone who was trying to hurt them? How do you handle situations where people you trust turn out to be manipulating you? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of fighting for family and standing up for truth. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's most difficult challenges. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that even in the darkest moments, love and courage can light the way forward.